It's gone 12:30 here by my time, so we'll kick off with it. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. My name's Jamie Waghorn. I'm the Business Development Manager based out of New Zealand. Across the business, we've obviously got a number of area managers that will be joining us today, along with a couple of guests. So we have Dan and Kimmy out of Oregon and George out of Taranaki in New Zealand. So thank you both for joining us. And you'll hear them as we go through today's webinar, our 7th webinar in the series. And throughout, we're just going to touch on some of these users and how we're utilising the technology. Our helpful team will be there to help any of the questions which can be asked through the chat. You'll notice that across the top of your screen there is a chat bubble. Any questions, if you can drop into there, and we'll answer those as we get along. But once again, thanks very much for joining us. We'll dive into today's webinar. I think we've got our US team on with us, but Cheyenne, if you can give a wee wave. Cheyenne is joining us out of North America, and we also have Andrew, or better known as Zippo, out of Melbourne, and Zippo will be running a wee bit at the end of the webinar around how to get the most out of your eShepherd platform. So to kick off today, we're going to rip into George and George's system, and George joins us today from Wanaka. He's actually on holiday, so I really appreciate your time, George, and joining us. But your farm is actually in Taranaki in the North Island of New Zealand. So thanks for joining us, mate. And do you want to just really touch on a wee intro as to yourself and your operation?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, Jamie and the team. So we have been using eShepherd for just over a year now. We're doing bull techno-grazing. So yes, Jamie just brings up a map of the farm. Basically, we're in the Taranaki in the hill country, and we've got a couple large river flats, each roughly 30 hectares each, which is where we've kind of implemented the system. So the reason we kind of got into eShepherd is we had these beautiful big river flats. As you can kind of see on the screen, the river rolls around right around the outside. The really good river flats, the fences down there initially, over a year ago, were pretty shot. And we just started a techno-grazing block on another part of the farm, which we do manually. And we kind of we're at a bit of a crossroads as to what to do with this block. So we kind of decided either rip out the fences, put them in exactly as they were, basically starting again with the big fencing cost, or do we try and techno-graze it manually? So kind of going down there every second day and shifting poly wires every second day, which there's a fair travel cost or time to get down there, and there's a pretty muddy and steep track that you don't want to be going down there during the winter. Or do we have a crack at these collars?
George, up through the bush you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, up through the bush, and then kind of there's a bit of a lane as well. So it takes about half an hour to get there. We kind of thought we'd have a crack with these collars, did a bit of cost analysis to decide whether it was worth it, and we kind of decided it was. Basically there's 8 lanes on this block. Each mob, you can see there's 4 mobs there, all different colors. Each mob has 2 lanes each. So basically they run around a racetrack, which is like the middle of it's kind of a line of troughs, which you can see the blue dots kind of going up from left to right on your screen. And they basically, run around the racetrack on daily shifts at the moment. So the bulls are, we start them on the system in about 6 months' time, 220 kgs, and we'll run them for 12 months on the system. The goal is to finish them around 600 kgs or 320 kgs carcass. And by doing that, we're hopefully doing around $4,000 a hectare profitability-wise, which is kind of nothing close that we would have been doing on it beforehand. So it's a pretty cool system.
And how are you driving it currently, George? Like, so obviously you're remote, you're in Wanaka as we speak. So how do you find the sort of daily driving it? How are you operating it, mate?
So what I basically do on a Sunday night, sit down with the laptop and I set up week's worth of paddocks. So there's enough cells per mob there. There's 120 cells per mob there. So if you did 1 cell per day, that's a 120-day round. At the moment, I'm running, 1.5 cells each per day. So they're going slightly quicker than that. So yeah, sit down on a Sunday night, set up 7 virtual paddocks each for each mob, and I put them on a schedule, and they shift at 10 a.m. each morning, which is what shows on that.
Yep.
On
we've
the
got
right
10
hand
and 2
side.
for a lot of them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So basically, it's like 2 hours, 2 hours to shift over onto the new piece, and then after that 2 hours, the old virtual paddock basically closes off, and then they're just stuck on the new one, and then they're on that one for 22 hours, and then till 10 o'clock the next morning.
Brilliant. And I see you drive that schedules pretty hard, so that's just a Sunday night job you alluded to, and you obviously move quite a few mobs. So how long do you sort of usually take doing that each weekend?
Takes a little bit of time, kind of half an hour, 40 minutes probably, between there's 10 mobs total. Yeah. So if I'm doing that many shifts, it takes probably half an hour, 40 minutes. Obviously, if you're going down to each paddock and shifting 10 mobs once a day for a week, it's going to take a lot longer than 40 minutes. So really, if you compare it to that, it's a hell of a lot quicker. And obviously, being able to do it remotely, I'm in beautiful sunny Wanaka at the moment. I've got my laptop here, so I just sit down and do it. It makes it really easy.
Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose from a typical day that you operate now, you've already touched on the shifts. I mean, you obviously still have a stockmanship aspect to what you're doing. So you obviously still get out across the animals fairly regularly, and you're running the micropod system that you touched on. Do you want to run us through what the day in your operation looks like now?
Yeah, so probably only go down there once every couple of weeks, just a bit of, checking animal welfare, checking the grass is kind of looking right. Do a bit of pasture covers, a few pasture covers as well to make sure that we're on track through the winter. Particularly important during the winter because you don't want to blow out your covers too early. The idea of what we're doing is basically by the end of winter, as we go into spring, we still want to have really high covers. We don't want to have depleted it, because then by the time spring starts and that grass starts growing, we can get into it really early, and it kind of extends our spring. And then basically, really good growth rates during that spring period. And we're kind of taking advantage of what's it called, compensatory growth. So we really wind them down during the winter, and basically slow them right down. And then after the winter, we go into spring, and they basically can just put on that weight straight away, as if they were really never slowed down. So they really catch up really fast. So we're trying to take advantage of that as well.
Brilliant. And likes of the you sort of touched on it there, likes of kicking off in the spring, but how's the system, I suppose, help you to respond to weather events or pasture conditions you just touched on? But I mean, you've also, do you want to touch on animal behaviour? The fact your operation is predominantly all bull beef there. Have you noticed some animal behavioural changes?
So beforehand we had been running the bulls, obviously seeing them physically every second day and shifting a polywire for them. So they were getting a lot of human contact, and because of that, they're becoming quite friendly, I suppose. Having them on the virtual fence where they're not seeing humans as much, I'm actually a little bit surprised that they are still quite quiet. I thought they would go a bit rogue and a bit, feral with that, but they still, I think having them in those kind of small mobs really helps. So the ones on the south block, they run in kind of mobs of, what are they, 26, 27s kind of thing. They're all weighted as well. So the red mob at the bottom, it's got the fewer animals, but they're the heaviest animals. And then all the way up to the top mob, which are the yellow ones, that's got the most animals, but they are the lightest. So that's kind of how we do it. And I think having those small mobs, does keep them nice and calm as well. on the northern block, just because of the paddock, the original paddock dimensions. We've kind of got smaller mobs there. But yeah,
And these are all
animal
quite new to the
behaviour.
system?
Yeah, they are. They've only been on the system for, I want to say, a month now. Month into training. So they've got a similar system where they are running a racetrack within an individual paddock. So this block was a little bit different from the other one, where the fences actually were in really good condition. So we didn't want to rip anything down, and we want to keep it adaptable so that we can run lambs and do cropping and whatnot in there. So what we did was basically put a fence line down the middle of each paddock and put 15 troughs along, dotted down the middle as well, all GPS marked out. And then each mob runs in a similar style, a racetrack around. So like say the light blue mob in the bottom right corner, they're running a racetrack around in that paddock. So they're right at the end at the moment. And then tomorrow they're going to shift across to the left, and then they're going to go back up.
Brilliant. And that you actually flicked me a couple of photos, but that's the image there, George, that you were touching on. That's the blue mob that we're looking at there now currently.
Yep, that's the blue mob in the far corner.
In the far corner there, yep.
Yep, and then kind of you can see the grazing line on the left-hand side of your screen. So this is about 10 days, 10-ish days, I think, in training. And you can see a pretty strong grazing line there. So, yeah, they pick it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's outstanding, isn't it? It's I suppose one of the main things that we keep getting discussed, and obviously those users that are on eShepherd that are here with us today can all probably attest to that. But the grazing line that we see does appear so quick. And this photo that you sent me was, what was that, the 8th or 10th day, was it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Pretty
so
soon
a
after
real
getting into
obvious
training.
grazing line. Yeah.
And then obviously later on, Jamie, you've got that other photo where the grazing lines carry on or still get more intense. Yeah, basically like this one here. This is our southern techno-grazing block, and obviously the grazing lines are pretty strong.
And so I suppose for context, you currently run a single wire over your pods down the middle, and they're on 3 virtual lines?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, if you the mob to the left, Jamie, on the right-hand side of that fence, that's a virtual boundary. So they have a virtual boundary on the right-hand side, and obviously the front and back as well. And on the left-hand side, there's a single wire fence there, and those have got the troughs down it. And that just allows us to, if there's any variance between what I've mapped out and the virtual boundaries, it allows the animals to actually get right up to the virtual fence and have a drink. And we obviously don't want them getting any pulses or beeps while they're drinking. So I can extend that virtual boundary past that single wire so that they can go up to that trough and have a drink without being beeped.
Yep. And that's I'll just jump to that screen. That's what you were talking about here. So obviously just showing the over the fence line approach there, so there's no interaction, which is pretty clear and obvious way to do it. Oh, is my screen sharing there? I think it is.
Yep.
So yeah, and you can see that it's a real good picture of that carryover, but works really well, doesn't it? And it's, I suppose, as you've already attributed to the fact that you're not having to go out there every day or every second day and move brakes. You touched on pasture, so you're obviously really intensive. You're at the pointy end of users, even in NZ, as far as how intensive you are, but you're obviously allocating a similar break to what you've allocated in the past. Have you noticed, as the animals interact with that fence line, a better utilisation? Are you finding just the fact that we're not dropping a reel that they don't rush on? Are you noticing much there, or you were already that intensive? You probably struggle to see that, I suppose.
Yeah, probably struggle to see that. We are shifting them every single day on eShepherd as opposed to every second day when we're doing it manually, just because time allows. And I suppose shifting them at the same time every day, because bulls or cattle in general are real, I suppose, creatures of habit. So if you're allowing them to, if they know every morning, 10 o'clock, they're going to get shifted onto the new brake, they're kind of almost ready for it. And as soon as that brake opens up, they just go straight onto it. They don't really muck around.
I suppose a couple more questions just before we wrap up, George, and jump on to the others. But so I've got two here which I've written down and I was speaking to you about, but was around, knowing your system now and the fact you're going there a couple of weeks. You run a big farm with a really low labour sense. So how have you found as far as the property goes? Are you more in control of your livestock now? And I suppose what's the biggest change you've seen with implementing eShepherd? The fact you've been on for nearly 3 years now, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose you've got a hell of a lot more control with the livestock doing eShepherd, because you can kind of make snap decisions around weather and whatnot. So you can be, sitting there going, there's going to be a real wet, cold snap coming up that's going to absolutely bog up the ground. So we can just, allocate them a little more, or we can shift them on, maybe do 2 breaks in a day so that we're not really damaging the pasture. And it's also really easy from this kind of bird's eye view looking down and having all these 120 cells per mob that you can so easily allocate the correct amount of pasture or get your rotation length, say the 80 days, really right and really correct. So each one of those little cells down there is exactly the same size. It's all, I think it's 608 square meters by memory, which is all it is basically the whole paddock, 30-ish hectares, divided into 480 cells. Yeah,
so that's outstanding. It's a very intensive system on what is predominantly an extensive property with a couple of patches of ability to really intensify what you're doing. It's a great testament to obviously how you run the operation there. I suppose lastly from me, George, was and it's always good when we've got lots of people that are considering virtual fencing. If someone was on the fence about adopting virtual fencing, I suppose what's one thing you'd tell them to consider?
I think it's a really good idea. I think don't think of it as a replacement for infrastructure and water, because you're still going to have water. You still need to have water, and that's actually a really big part of it. So it's not necessarily going to save you on infrastructure, but I think it's a replacement or substitute for labor, and it gives you kind of more control. So you really need to think about that thing. Water is massively important. So you can't just put this on, your big hills with one kind of trough right down bottom that they're not really going to get to. So I think that's important. And I think as well, like any kind of piece of technology, you kind of don't know every single thing about it until you really start using it. So in saying that, I would probably start small, or start with an actual manageable bit. Don't just blow out your whole farm in one go with it, as much as you'd love the sales, I'm sure, Jamie, but start small, know how, really get a good understanding of how it works, what your limitations are, how you can use it, and then build on from there, I think.
Yeah, no, great answer, mate. And to be fair to to our clients when we are talking with them, look, we actually recommend starting small. It's the beauty with this model of virtual fencing is you can go and pick 60, 80, 100 animals if you're running 500 or 600, and actually learn your return on investment, learn your ROI. And every farm is going to implement this differently. Every property has a different user case. Yours was obviously pretty obvious in the sense of the labor intensity of getting out to that block. But for a lot of people, it's actually understand your return on investment. But you hit the nail on the head, George. Water infrastructure is a big part of our conversation. It's the one limiting factor with virtual fencing. We still need good access to water. We've had webinars, so I think it might have been number 5, Zippo, that Brendan jumped on with us and shared his wagon wheel grazing. That's an outstanding way to utilise it in the interim. But certainly, looking at investing in water going forward is a big part of it. So, no, really appreciate your time, George. And I know you're away on holiday and actually getting off the farm for a change. So we really do sincerely thank you for your time and joining us today. And I hope the rest of your trip goes really well. And look, hang around, and I'm sure there'll be some questions come in that we'll jump back to and answer towards the end, if that's all right.
Awesome, no problem. Thanks for having me, Jamie.
No worries. All right, and joining us from the US, we've got Daniel and Kimmy. So thank you for both of you guys for taking your time out of your, I assume, late evening in the US. So Cheyenne will take over here with some slides, and if you can tell us a wee bit about your operation, Daniel Kimmy, that'd be great.
Hi, how you doing? So, can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So, our operation's quite a bit different than the one just previously described. That was pretty interesting doing that. But so we're out here in Oregon, and it's mostly kind of mountainous and stuff. And we run cows on about 8,000 acres. And the biggest problem we had was the cross fencing to run cattle on 8,000 acres. You know, we still have to build a pretty good perimeter fence, mainly for neighbors' cows not getting on the land that I graze on. And but the cross fencing, you know, it's constant. It is a labor intensive problem with elk mainly, and a lot of timber and stuff, trees blowing down and knocking down fences. And the biggest problem that we would have found is that you don't know your cows are out until somebody calls you, or you happen to go up there and see that they're on your neighbor's property or something. But I can't say enough good things about eShepherd. We've been doing it for about a year now. It works absolutely better than I would have even imagined. It's fantastic. So anyway, so the next slide is just kind of like an overview of, you can see some of the virtual paddocks that I have set up, and I don't do small little paddocks. They're 300 to 500 acre pieces that I'll run groups of cows on and stuff. And let's see, what was I gonna say? All right, so then my experience with it is the computer program, very easy to use. I don't interact with it every day as far as changing stuff. We pretty much kind of like, I'll put them somewhere for 30 days and I can adjust it as I notice that they've grazed an area too much. I can kind of cut them out of that area and force them to eat a different area. The iPhone app works great. You know, when you're out on the ranch, you can see where they're at. I thought putting the collars on and everything was simple. Training the cows, I think it is very simple to train them because of the herd mentality of the cattle. So even when one of them breaks out and, you know, gets a pulse and is out, it naturally wants to come back to the herd. And so they learn pretty quick. It works really good on our bulls. We raise primarily Black Angus, and the bulls are probably the most compliant. So it's very nice. We can keep groups of cows with a particular bull separate, or we do registered Angus. So I need to know which bull is with what cows. And I mean, like, I had them in my hayfield here with no fence in between them, 2 different mobs of 25 with a bull in each one, and they're separated by maybe 10 yards, and those bulls would go up to that invisible fence and look at each other and scratch and paw and stuff, but never did they cross over, and which I thought was amazing. And then Gallagher themselves, they've just been excellent with customer service and helping. Anytime I had a problem, they just reached right out right away. So we did get our collars. So the next slide, Cheyenne. We did get our collars with a NRCS grant, our first round of collars that we bought. And basically what they're trying to do is help us improve the range ground to better control, keeping cows on a piece of ground for a certain amount of time and then getting them off. And then for the next year, maybe I'll rest a certain area. And without these collars, I would have to be setting up fences and electric fences or something like that. And you can see by that picture, it's just not practical for us. If it was a flat piece of ground that's just we could set up something, but other things that are an advantage, like my hay barn that's in that picture right there. You know, I mean, I don't even have a fence around that. And the cows, last year we had a wildfire approaching, and I had a lot of grass that was pretty high right there. And I brought those cows in right around that hay barn to eat it down in preparation for the wildfire coming. And they didn't get in the hay barn to eat the hay, which is, it's pretty interesting. So, the next slide just showed, you know, I was really impressed with how, I don't think the cows at all mind the audio signal. I've watched the cows, and they'll literally just go along and beep, beep, beep. It doesn't bother them. They will test that boundary all the time. And that's what I love about eShepherd, is because it's solar. They're not running some battery down by doing that. But just like the guy said before, I noticed when I move a fence, you know, it's like minutes, it seems like those cows discover it. So we were kind of wondering if, you know, like this fence here that you see, we were wondering, well, shoot, if the cows learn that there's an invisible fence there, will they cross it, or are they going to be afraid to cross it because they knew that they got shocked up there? And they don't seem to care at all. As soon as I open it up, and next thing you know, if one goes, they'll all go. And so I thought that was pretty cool. The next slide. So this was our full, we just completed a year with it, and we were able to utilize it, helping us with our calving, and it was phenomenal. So in years past, you know, we were always out there driving around in the side-by-side stuff, checking on the cows, having to count them and notice that one's missing, and so she's probably off calving somewhere, that kind of stuff. And with this, I was able to sit here on the computer every morning, and I'd look and I could see, hey, this cow is off on her own. She probably had a calf, and we were right 99% of the time. I could see the behavior on the app and go right to it, and we didn't have to try to find them. There's, you know, with as many trees and stuff as we have, sometimes it was very, very difficult to find those moms. And now we could do that. The other neat feature was the fact that as soon as they did calve, you could see these cows are calving in the field.
Just a wee pause there, just while his internet catches up. Sorry, folks, won't be a second. That's all right. Just while he comes back to us, there was a question in the chat around the two mobs in the same physical paddock or pasture, but different virtual paddocks. So yes, you can do that, and Daniel was just touching on that there. Also, George, you've done that quite a bit in the past. Obviously, there's single wire separation, but have you had same mobs in the same paddock without a physical barrier between them?
Yeah, I have done it before.
Yep.
And they can go up and obviously interact and stuff. And I have probably seen a couple go over the line, but then they kind of, because bulls, you know, they want to be in their own mob, they come back to their own mob pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do it. I wouldn't be doing it all the time, or if you can help it, I'd like to keep it, you know, single wire between them or something. But that's on a very small scale with small paddocks and stuff. Maybe on his block where he's saying it's a lot more extensive and a lot larger paddocks, it'd probably be a lot more doable.
Yeah, it is. No, we've got a few from your Lawn Peak station down in Otago doing that right now. You know, they've got some bulls up on some hill faces, and they're fairly much in close proximity to each other on the same, different virtual fences within the same paddock. So very achievable. Charles, you had a question there?
Yep. Thanks, Jamie. I was just going to bring Cheyenne into the conversation because I think, in fact, I think Daniel's coming back in now. But Cheyenne, do you remember the scenario with Daniel and Kimmy where they had the single physical paddock but the two mobs of cows and bulls?
Yeah, I think Daniel just touched on that.
Okay.
The bulls, like he had his cows in one group with their bulls and the heifers in one group with the bull. within the same virtual paddock. Is that the scenario, Charles?
Pretty sure it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, our internet shut off for some reason. We live
No
in
You're
worries.
right. Welcome back.
So
Okay.
I was just talking away. I don't know where I ended.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
Just identifying the calving cows using the app.
Yeah, that was incredible. You know, I mean, if you guys heard me already, I don't know how much of that you guys heard, but it really helped us identify when they were calving, because I could look at this screen right here and I could see that one cow went off on her own, and in, you know, so we could go check, and we could also intervene. You know, we had a couple cows that we had to pull their calves, and if we hadn't had that tool, you know, maybe we would have noticed her or maybe not, but we were able to save that calf and the mom, you know, that kind of stuff. So yeah. And then this year is the first year that we've used it to help tighten up our breeding. And so we'll see how that develops next year. But, you know, in years past, because we put them out on 500 to 1,000 acres at a time, you know, they would spread out so much that the bull would really have to work hard. And so this spring, I was able to put the bull right with him, and I kept him really tight with those cows so that he didn't have to, you know, hunt around for open cows all over. And so I think that's going to definitely tighten up my calving period, you know. So let's see. And then rounding up cattle, you know, we'll move them physically sometimes, and it's just so nice to be able to look right on your phone and you could just say, hey, they're all here, versus before you would gather them up, you try to count, and this person counts 80, this one counts 84, you know, and so you're like, well, I think I got them all, you know. It's just a huge time saver. But then this spring, we moved them down the road, and I've been able to move them all over this about 3,000 acres just with eShepherd. We haven't moved them eShepherd, and it's awesome. So we have put them on calves that are 400 pounds or so, and I will say, you know, don't expect too much there. They do okay, but not as good as adult cows. And so if you could put them on them and then they're still with some adult cows, then I've noticed that works better. But last year we weaned a whole bunch of heifers, put the collars on, and then put them out in a different spot. And they just it just took them a little bit longer to kind of understand what's going on, just I think by the maturity of the animal. And now they're all perfect with it. But yeah, so yeah, and so there's just so many advantages of it. You could see the wildfire that's approaching in that picture. And so the cows were way up on a mountain when we were way away on a anniversary trip. We were about 5 hours away, and this fire wasn't approaching our ranch. And then while we were up there, all of a sudden it started approaching our ranch. And so I was able to move those cows down just by their natural, you know, they kind of go up and down the mountain all day, you know. And so every time some would come down the mountain, I would shut them and keep them from going back up. And over the course of 2 days, I was able to move them all right down to the road right here. And when we came back from our trip, I had them all basically in a paddock right at the gate. All I had to do is open the gate and have them follow a pickup truck right into my hayfield there. So that was phenomenal, you know. So there was a lot of other ranchers that actually lost a lot of cattle in the wildfire stuff because they had no way to get them really quickly or even know where they were at that point, because a lot of people just turn them out on a lot of ground. So And then I see somebody put something about, do the calves stay with their moms until weaning? Yeah, they do. And obviously that the calves obviously can go through the fence, but it is, it's kind of funny. I went up just the other day to check on some cows and stuff, and I noticed all these cows standing at this one spot, which was where the virtual fence was, and their calves were 50 yards down the other side, but the moms are just standing there just waiting for them to come back up, mooing for them and everything. And I just thought that was incredible. And the calves they'll come back, obviously. So let's see.
Awesome. So what, Daniel, just in closing, what has changed, or what do you see as the biggest benefit from, your first consideration of, going with eShepherd to now having it fully installed? For somebody that's on the fence, what is your greatest advantage or takeaway that eShepherd has given you and Kimmy?
I would say the comfort in knowing where your cattle are all the time. You know what I mean? Because before we would turn cows out and you just, you pretty much know where they're at because you've got physical fences and stuff like that. But I mean, I call neighbors all the time to tell them, hey, your cows are out, or hey, yeah, you got some cows on mine, because they don't know till somebody calls them. And for me, I've had people call me and say, hey, I think you got some cows down on the road, down along this. And I said, nope, I know exactly where all my cows are. I can look at them right here on my phone right now. And just the no stress of that. I don't have ranchers calling me saying my cows are on their property. It's always me calling them the other way. And just the ease of the labor of it. We're going to rip out all the cross fencing on that 8,000 acres, because that actually has become kind of a hindrance to the program sometimes, because I'm like, sometimes cows will get on the other side of this physical fence because there's a gate there or whatever, and they're trying to get back to their calf or something. And anyway, just the labor of not having to maintain those fences and keep them up and stuff, because anybody that knows with wildlife and stuff like that, the fences they're always needing to be maintained. And so it's very comforting knowing where my cattle are all the time, how they're doing. Yeah. And I look at it every day, 20 times a day. And I like the fact that I can move it around as much as I want. It doesn't seem to bother the cows or anything. I can, like when they're out here in the hayfield and we're calving, I was moving it around all the time. And I am going to try. I talked to some guy, called me and asked me in my opinion on the fence and stuff. And he said he talked to somebody else that was laying out 4 or 5 days worth of feed during the winter and then just opening that up. And I sure wish he would have called me like in November instead of in January, because that would have saved, because that is a labor intensive every single morning, getting out, feeding the cows. And if I can change that to every 5 days or 4 days, it's unbelievable. I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Daniel and Kimmy, for your time. Yeah, we're always continuing to learn here on the eShepherd journey. So thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Daniel and Kimmy, and thanks, Cheyenne. And just remember, folks, there is the chat up the top, so drop your questions in there as we continue along. There was a couple of questions come through that we can answer, but I'll ask the two farmers that are or ranchers and farmers that are joining us. Does the system ever fail, and can cattle get out? And if George, we start with you. What have you found to date, mate?
I have seen it before early on in the journey. We actually had a big thunderstorm, and our base station got struck by lightning. I was actually in a plane returning back to the farm, and we flew through the thunderstorm, and the plane got struck by lightning, and then landed. And then the next morning, I think Zippo called me and said, your base station's down. We don't know what happened. I was like, oh, I can probably guess. So, obviously just need a replacement part, and we got it back up and running pretty quick. So that has happened to us before. Dan, I don't know what you've noticed yourself.
Yeah, and Dan and Kimmy, have you got any further to that question around the system dropping out or cattle getting out?
I've only had it go down a couple times because of, I don't know what it was. I reached out to eShepherd and there was some sort of software thing going on with the cell tower or something like that, but it didn't last long. And I really haven't had any cattle get out I do have physical fences on the outside of the property. So I do have kind of a double backup there, but no, rarely do they ever have a problem. And
Yeah.
I think if they do, it's for a predator or something like that. I have seen some cows kind of run out of it and stuff, and I'm assuming that might be from, we do have wolves and stuff that come through the area once in a while, and then cougars and stuff. So maybe that's what happened, but no, it's pretty dependable.
Yeah. I want to add oh, sorry, Jamie. I was just going to say, I want to add, with our system, we kind of do find, because our cells are so tight, and they're being shifted obviously every day type of thing, that we do occasionally get like one or two animals. If I look at it, you can see like one or two animals out, and they'll wander maybe like 20 meters or so, and then I'll look at half an hour and they'll be back in. So usually run around like 99% containment type of thing. But there's usually a couple, often a couple animals out and they come back in, and they're not eating, masses of feed while they're doing that. So it's all good.
Yeah, and that's the point I was exactly going to touch on, George, and even to your system, but we see it through other users. The odd animal, particularly with bull units, they fight, they can get chased out. But in reality, what happens today is, more often than not, they fight and they might break through your poly wire or your white wire, and that's on the ground. So now you haven't got one animal out, but you've got the entire mob out. So the virtuals certainly allow that animal to go forward, but it also allows it to re-enter without having any adverse reaction. And they certainly do re-enter the mob through their own context really, really well. And that's one of the big benefits that we've seen. Someone else was just asking there around, and probably more for you, Daniel and Kimmy, around moving. Can you move cattle while they're calving and with newborn calves and following? So do you guys want to touch on that? You still moving your brakes whilst during the calving period?
We do, but you got to be careful that you don't, if you see them move on the computer and think that, they might have left their calves back, you know what I mean? So especially like the kind of ground we do, sometimes those, several cows will leave several cows laying with some mom babysitter. And if they all move up and then you shut those out from coming back, that might be the scenario where those moms, I think they will bust back through to go get them. And so what I'll usually do is I'll open up a new area and I kind of wait until I see that they spent the night there. Because if they spent the night there, I'm pretty sure they have the calves with them. And then I shut that fence behind them.
Yeah. And we've certainly found with cow-calf operations in NZ, and I believe Mark has in Australia, we're seeing calves, pushing out 700-800 meters from mum quite comfortably and coming back. I'm not sure what that is in yards, sorry, but they're pushing out a fair way. And as long as they can hear and see mum, they come back very, very well.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're sort of 45 minutes into it now, and we're going to kick on to a wee bit of tech time with Zippo. So Zippo, you had a wee bit of stuff you want to share on the platform, just around. Do you want to lead on what that was around? Sorry, mate. That was around.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Look, so I'm going to just share a little bit about. Well, I'll show a few more customer examples on how they're using the virtual fencing system to allocate pasture. Very topical at the moment for the southern part of the hemisphere is crop grazing. So I'll share my screen and I'll talk a little bit about this, and I'll give a demonstration of how you can do this and how simple it is to use the eShepherd platform to manage your pasture allocation. So this one here is a New Zealand property where they're strip grazing now some kale. So you can see this kale, it's nearly 2 meters tall. They used to manage this with electric fencing, with temporary electric fencing, and the process of allocating small amounts was to ride the motorbike through the kale to plough a path essentially, And then you'd have to walk through that field afterwards and put up a temporary electric hot wire. And of course, there are all sorts of issues with that where the kale might pop up again a little bit and touch the electric fence, and it would, you'd struggle with containment and the bulls would go over it. So now this operator is using the virtual fencing system on about 10 mobs of bulls. And you can see here on this side of the screen only 2 of the mobs that he's managing and how he's doing that. So you can see the active virtual fence line running around this group of animals here. And you can see a couple of the previous virtual fence lines as well. So, he's just extending the boundary, that leading edge boundary, and allocating a little bit more of the kale every day for a lot of mobs, right? And just like George, he's doing this on a weekly basis. He sets up a bunch of new breaks and puts them in a schedule and just allows them to, be fed out. Another interesting thing that he's doing, he's set up his virtual paddocks to allow the animals to come out of the physical paddock and back to the yard. So if he does want to bring them back into the yards for any reason at a short notice, he doesn't even need to turn off his virtual paddocks. He can just bring them out of the paddock and allow them to come all the way back to the yards, because the virtual paddock, these boundaries are not doing anything as such to contain these animals. So he's got them wrapped around the yards, which are off the screen here at the moment, but allows him a lot of flexibility. So that's one operation here. And I'll just show a few more examples if I advance forward on these slides. So here's someone else. I think this is also our winter crop paddock. And you can see the number of virtual paddocks that have been used to slowly allocate more of the pasture. And the great thing that I see a lot now as I look across so many different operations is just the flexibility that virtual fencing gives in your pasture allocation. So, you can see that he's switched from allocating pasture in this direction. Now he's slowly moving a virtual fence in that direction, right? So it just opens up so many more possibilities on how you want to actually manage that the pasture in your paddock. So here's another one. This one here again is on crop. The satellite imagery is a little bit out of date, but you can see lots and lots of virtual fence lines being drawn to slowly increase that pasture allocation. Here's an animal that's pushed out, just like we heard earlier, where, yes, that does happen from time to time, where an animal will pop out. In this instance, there is still a physical fence line running down between the 2 mobs. But speaking with this particular operator already, there's some discussion on, well, I don't need these fences anymore. I could quite happily run the 2 mobs side by side. I'd just like George said, he'd be a little bit hesitant doing that, and I agree. It does put a bit more pressure on the animals. They're likely to want to interact a little bit more if there is no physical barrier between the 2 mobs at all. But certainly it is possible, and increasingly we can see customers doing things like that. So what else have we got? Oh, this one here is, we spoke about this earlier. This one has been shown in a previous webinar. I'll just play this animation one more time. This is, again, pasture allocation around a central dam in a paddock. So just continuing to allow animals to come further and further out to graze fresh pasture. And you can see those breaks opening up. And then they come back to that central point here for water. And you'll see in a moment here where we switch over. There we go. There's a switch now to this next segment here of the paddock. And this is not crop feeding. This is just, feeding out the available pasture in the paddock and coming back to one central watering point. So lots and lots of different ways of being able to manage your pasture, and great to see the creativity of our customers in doing so. So what I wanted to do just for a short moment is give you a sense of how that's done on the eShepherd platform. So I've got a very, very simple scenario here, and it maybe looks a little bit similar to some of the ones that we've seen today. So we've just got some physical paddocks that are set up in lanes. And in this case, again, we're assuming we've got some watering points along the physical fence lines so that you can start to move your animals from one part of the paddock and wrap it around like those kind of race laneways. So the way to do that is it's very simple to construct your virtual paddocks. So in this instance, I've just set up a few to show. Yep, here we go. There's the first one in a sequence, Abby VP01. So that's where animals might start off. And then you can see you can just extend that grazing line, and I'll demonstrate how to do that in just a moment, to continually increase the pasture allocation. And once you've actually reached the next watering point, then you can start to introduce the back fence as well. So you can creep that back fence forward along with your mob. So the process of doing that, I'll create the next one in this series here where I've gotten to Abby VP07. So the easy way to do it is to use the virtual fence copy feature. So down the bottom here, I can press copy. That starts me off with the previous virtual fence line. And then I'll try and zoom in so you can see this is as good as we can get it on the screen. It's very easy to extend that the front fence by just putting down another fence post. And you can see as I'm moving this along, I'm getting a measuring tool. I've got my unit set to metric, so I can see that this is an additional 10 meters or thereabouts. So I can extend my grazing line forward and have a very precise allocation of how much further forward I'm moving that fence line. And similarly, I can bring the back fence back up behind them as well. So I can just pull that back fence up behind them. This is a nice simple scenario where I'm only having to adjust 4 dots. I think maybe George has a little bit more of a challenge on his hands with some of the interesting shapes that he's got, but the principle remains the same. So then I can go name this paddock as well. So it's in this case Abby virtual paddock 08. It will be in the sequence, and I save that. And we've created the next one in the sequence. So very easy to continually extend your grazing areas. And of course, you can have all sorts of weird and wonderful shapes to accommodate your virtual paddock. So I think I'll leave it at that unless there's any questions about any of that. And we'll leave some room for questions from our attendees.
And Zippo, just while you were there, do you want to touch on, as you were creating that paddock in the bottom left where you named it, why we have a total grazing and a grazing area measurement?
Yeah, okay, yes, let's jump back into that one. So absolutely, there is some measurements that are provided down the bottom here. So we've got the total area of that paddock. Now, it is giving me the entire area of this virtual paddock that I've drawn. Many people are actually more interested in the additional area that has been allocated. Now, in the scenario that I've created, it's a little bit more difficult to see that. There is an attempt to show the new allocation that we've provided, but it is when you're starting to do back grazing as well, some of these calculations get thrown out a little bit. So one thing that some customers do like to do well, first of all, if we go back to George's example, he's already predefined all his his physical paddocks in allocation. So I might just jump over there to show that. And this may make a little bit more sense now for some people that maybe didn't quite pick up on this earlier when we were looking at it. But all of these white lines that have been brought in, right, they've been pre-allocated in terms of the amount of pasture that is available within each one of these segments. So George knows exactly how many of those he can allocate. So these paddocks have really been brought in as a grid and template for George to follow so that he knows as things taper down over here, you can see everything opens up and the lines are spaced further apart to, again, give the same area allocation to these animals as he's moving forward. So if you don't have a nice grid like that you can import, then what you can do is take some measurements using your virtual paddock as a measuring tool. So I'll just go back to this property down here in Victoria that I've created to set this up. So let's say you want to know what is the actual new allocation that you're providing to your animals. So the easy way to do that is just to use another virtual paddock as a measuring tool, right? So if I just overlay this virtual paddock here and save this, well, actually before I even save it, I can already see down here that the grazing area that I'm allocating here is 0.8 of a hectare. So once you know what that allocation is, then you can start to do things. You can start to just use the distance measuring tool to allocate the same amount of pasture again each day.
Brilliant. And a question came through in the chat there, Zippo, just around, can we run reports on your past grazing records?
Yeah, so look, that's a little bit more of a work in progress feature that we are going to try and bring in more pasture management tools and historic records. At the moment, you'll see a lot of operators, they tend to keep many of their virtual paddocks that they have drawn to give them an indication of where their animals were at what time. But that can get quite busy very quickly. So in some of the examples I've shown, some customers end up with hundreds of virtual paddocks that they have got in their virtual paddock list. And that can become a little bit cumbersome then to deal with those. So the first thing that we're doing to allow you to at least maintain a record of virtual paddocks that you've had in the past is an archiving feature. So archiving will allow you to, let's say you've completed this physical paddock, you've grazed this one out, and you've maybe drawn, let's say 100 virtual paddocks to allocate your pasture. You'll be able to put those virtual paddocks into an archive, which essentially removes them from any of your normal activities. But it will keep it on the platform so you can refer back to them and you know when they've been turned on and when they were used. So that's a first little step towards giving some visibility and history of your grazing, but there's more coming to really improve that visibility and the record keeping. Brilliant.
All right, I'm just mindful of the time. We're coming up on our hour. If there's any other questions, please add them to the chat and we will come back to you on those. Just from the eShepherd team, want to say thank you very much for joining us. We have three. We have Cheyenne, JC and Charles based out of the US. So you can reach out to any of those staff members. We have in Australia, we have Mark Dempsey. He's unfortunately on the road this week, but he is on the webinar here. So anyone throughout Australia, please feel free to reach out and touch base with Mark and myself across New Zealand. All the while, Zippo and the team in the background are there to support all our new users coming on. So we really do appreciate your time. Our most thanks goes out to George and Daniel and Kimmy for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we'll let you get back to your holiday, George. But thanks again for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar. If there's any questions, just drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.